Proletariat.
All right, folks, I want to welcome you back to Pastor's Point of View, number 154. Today is February the 12th, 2021. I'm back with my good friend Tomalea Bench. Pastor Jim, who a lot of people have asked me about, is doing fine. He's just, he's recovering and getting better, and we should have him back imminently. We're going to talk today, and I really didn't know what to do with this. I mean, basically, I collect things during the week that I think that resonate with me, and I just hope that my list makes some kind of coherent sense at the end of the week. But when I looked at all the items that the Lord had sort of placed on my heart in the news, I just decided to call this the a prophecy update. So it deals with prophecy update and the culture war simultaneously. So I've entitled this The Decline of the United States of America and the Rise of the Beast System, because I think that's what we're seeing. That's the common thread that runs through all of these items. You'll notice here the 6 things that we're going to try to cover today. If we have to break this into 2 shows, so be it, but that's our list of 6. And why don't we just go ahead and start with the issue that is on everybody's mind, and that's the impeachment that's currently taking place relative to the President of the United States. And we start off with this article from Chris Wallace of Fox News. And it's an article from newsmax.com. It's by Theodore Bunker, February 10th, just a couple of days ago, 2021. And the title of it is Chris Wallace Praises Very Strong Argument for Trump's Impeachment. And what does that paragraph say?
Starting with a quote, "I thought his close was very strong. What happened on January 6th, he said, was the framers' worst nightmare come to life, and that a president can't inflame insurrection and run away. You're going to hear this over and over again, a January exception. The idea that a president can't commit crimes, allegedly, and then leave office, and somehow he's thereby off the hook."
So here's Chris Wallace of Fox News saying, man, this impeachment of the president is just great, and they have a strong case to make. And even though he's left office, go get him anyway. Now, we have done shows, I think you were with me on one of them, relative to Fox News, the liberal drift at Fox News, and people can go back and look at PPOV 138 and 144 to get our thoughts on that. But, here is Fox News, a main guy at Fox News, giving, authenticity, credence, credibility to this whole kangaroo court situation relative to Donald Trump being impeached. And the reason this is a kangaroo court concerning impeachment is because of the Constitution. You do not have to be a rocket scientist or a legal scholar to understand this. The founding fathers of the United States of America put into very few words, in a crisp sense, if I can get you to move that over, in a crisp and crystallized sense, what impeachment's supposed to be about. So we have the relative clauses here. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, Article 1, Section 3, Clauses 6 and 7, and Article 2, Section 4. So what does that first clause say? Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. It's just one sentence.
The House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment.
First thing to understand about impeachment is it's the House that impeaches. So a lot of people think the Senate is right now impeaching, and that's not true. The House has already impeached Trump. This is the second time they did it. They impeached Bill Clinton. And they're the only government entity that has the power to impeach. It's I would analogize it to a grand jury indictment, where a grand jury basically makes a decision, is there enough evidence to go through with a trial? That is, in essence, what the House is supposed to do. And they make that determination by a simple majority vote. It doesn't remove anybody from office. It just says there's now enough evidence to follow through with a trial, which now takes place in the Senate for the President of the United States. And so Trump has been impeached a second time, and now there's a trial in the Senate to decide if there's enough evidence to remove him from office. And that takes us to Article 1, Section 3, Clauses 6 and 7. What do those say?
The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law.
So if the president that they're contemplating impeaching and then ultimately removing from office, they've got to have a 2/3 supermajority in the Senate to remove. And everybody knows they don't have that number. So they're just doing this as more of a theater and a show. I have some reasons as to why I think they're doing it, which I'll give in just a second. They relate to our topic, the decline of the United States of America and the rise of the beast system. Now, you'll notice what Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 says. You just read it. When the president is tried, the Chief Justice, that's the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, shall preside over the trial. I remember William Rehnquist presiding over Bill Clinton's trial. So here's a yes or no question. Do we have that right now?
My understanding is no.
No, we don't. Patrick Leahy, who's very liberal, Vermont, if I'm not mistaken, who's actually going to be one of the voters in the Senate to remove Trump or not, is now presiding as the, Chief Justice. And that should be Roberts in there doing that, shouldn't it? So you look at this and you say, well, they're not even following the Constitution in the most simple ways. So this whole thing is really a kangaroo court. And then you want to say something? I see you smiling over there.
Well, on that, but after we read Article 2, Section 4.
All right. And then if you move to Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, it mentions removal from office. And then Article 2, Section 4, which we haven't read yet, says removal from office for what? Treason, that's a combination of treason and bribery. Treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors. So how do you have a trial to remove someone from office when they've already left office? Does that make any sense? I mean, you don't impeach and try a former president or a private citizen, and yet that's what they're doing. And they don't have the Chief Justice of SCOTUS presiding over it. So it's almost like the Constitution to them is something they've just discarded, a long time ago. And then let's go to Article 2, Section 4. You mind reading that real quick?
The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
So what don't we have? We don't have treason. We don't have bribery. We don't have high crimes or misdemeanors because the whole issue against Trump is he incited a riot. And when you look at the language of his speech, he did no such thing. He talked about peaceably making your views known. And if you were to go through Democrats and some of the things they've said in their speeches, quite clearly, you could argue that they were inciting violence in their speeches, so maybe they should be impeached as well. So you don't have any of these underlying crimes. You don't have a situation where you're removing someone from office because they're not in office anymore. And you don't have the Chief Justice of SCOTUS presiding. So what do you make of this? It's all political theater, and it's a show, and it's a kangaroo court. And beyond that, they don't even have the 2/3 votes necessary to remove him from office. So the big question is, well, why are they doing this? And I don't know, because I can't read hearts. I do have some theories. One of my theories is they want to make sure that there's never a Trump movement ever again. They don't want anybody running for president of any countenance that happens to be outside the establishment. And they're sending a message that if this ever happens again, if someone should ever become popular enough where they could potentially do this as Trump successfully did, this is what you have to look forward to. That to me could be the only possible motivation why they're pursuing this fake impeachment. And then the other thing I was thinking of is it's a magician's trick. You know, when a magician is doing their trick, you don't look at what they're doing with their right hand in front of you. The actual trick is what's happening with the hand you can't see, or the hand out of the spotlight, or the hand out of camera view. So they are, as America is focused on this circus, doing a whole bunch of other stuff under the table related to the Second Amendment, a credit score system, anti-Semites in the Biden administration that nobody is paying attention to. And those things are pushing the decline of the United States of America and rising the beast system. So what would you add to that?
Well, I would say that they are amending the Constitution. There was an impeachment a year ago, and I felt like they amended a year ago by impeaching him for trying to encourage another nation's leadership to investigate criminal activity. So that became an impeachable offense. And so I felt that that was an amendment in that case. Well, here the other day, by simple majority vote, they amended the Constitution by declaring that what they are doing is constitutional. So I was looking at just from what their actions are, whether or not I believe that it's constitutional. And I think that with Trump, as you say, I think it's the second phrase here, disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor. I think that they know that more information is going to come out about the November election. And so I think they're getting out there right now.
They're trying to kind of stem it off.
Yeah, well, and they're trying to prevent anything from reversing, the situation as it is right now, or 2024.
Yeah, and they almost look desperate in the stuff that they're doing. I mean, logically, constitutionally, it makes no sense. But that's where everybody's focused, on this circus. And they're not focused on some of the other things we're going to talk about now, which involve the decline of the United States and the rise of the beast system. So let's move to Roman numeral 2. I just have entitled this The Gun Grabbers. And of all of the issues to pay attention to right now, in my opinion, this is the real issue. Because the Marxists, they can't do anything to us of any lasting sustenance until they disarm us first. As long as the American people are armed, we have the potential to push back. And so the name of the game is to disarm the American people. Now, people say, well, I thought this was pastor's point of view. I thought this was a Bible program, Christian program. Why would you as a Christian, as a pastor, as a spiritual leader, as a shepherd, why would you be talking about guns? Well, the truth of the matter is the gun issue, and I'm talking about ownership of private firearms to quell tyranny. That's what I'm talking about. That is a theological issue. And if you want to go back to pastor's point of view number 45, one of our earlier pastor's points of view that we did, Dr. Jim McGowan and myself dealt with this whole issue for about an hour and a half, dealing with the biblical part of it, the political part of it, the constitutional part of it. But notice this quote here from Granville Sharp. Any Greek student knows exactly who Granville Sharp was. He was a Greek scholar, and he invented a law of, or recognized, I should say, a law of Greek grammar. So anybody that's taken introductory Greek knows who Granville Sharp is. What they don't know is the statements that Granville Sharp made relative to the ownership of private firearms. And what does he say here? By the way, he worked alongside William Wilberforce to abolish the slave trade, and he was a political activist. And I like to throw this in because a lot of people think, well, you're dealing with political issues. Why don't you get back to spiritual things? And this dichotomy between the political and the spiritual is not the way Bible scholars used to think, as evidenced by Granville Sharp. So what does he say here?
No Englishman can be truly loyal who oppose the principles of English law, whereby the people are required to have arms of defense in peace, for mutual as well as private defense. The laws of England always required the people to be armed, and not only armed, but to be expert in arms.
And basically what he's saying is, look, if you're an Englishman and you're not armed and you're not an expert in arms, you're falling down on your duties to your own country, and you're falling down on your duties to God himself, because that is what God has given you by way of an unalienable right to, stem tyrannical behavior from the government. And all the Greek that I studied in seminary, Granville Sharp, it would have been nice if one of those Greek textbooks had put this quote in, just to kind of orient us that, just because someone is a political activist doesn't mean they're somehow non-spiritual. I mean, Granville Sharp is recognized as a leading Greek scholar, even today. And yet I have to learn after the fact that he was also a pro, at least in the Englishman sense of the word, a pro-Second Amendment type of guy. But if you really want to know what the Second Amendment is about, look no further than Joseph Story, who was a very prolific writer in the United States Supreme Court in very early American history. And he wrote in 1833, that's not long after the Constitution was accepted. In 1787, he wrote an authoritative commentary on the Constitution. So if you want to understand the true meaning of the Constitution, and if you want to understand the true meaning of the Second Amendment, look at what Joseph Story writes. Do you mind reading that? And here he's making commentary on the Second Amendment.
The next amendment is, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The importance of this article will scarcely be doubted by any persons who have duly reflected upon the subject.
That cracks me up. He says there's no debate about this at all. Sorry to interrupt you.
The right of the citizens to keep and bear arms has justly been considered as the palladium of the liberties of a republic, since it offers a strong moral check against the usurpation and arbitrary power of rulers, and will generally, even if these are successful in the first instance, enable the people to resist and triumph over them. There is certainly no small danger that indifference may lead to disgust, and disgust to contempt, and thus gradually undermine all the protection intended by this clause of our National Bill of Rights.
So he's commenting on the Constitution, this prolific Supreme Court justice, and he says, let's get to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is all about the right of the citizen. So it's not talking about some kind of well-regulated militia, which is, they say it's just some kind of private army. No, this is the individual citizen that has this right. Just like the individual citizen is the focus in the whole Bill of Rights. First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. It's protecting the citizen against big government. And I like your pronunciation. He calls this, correct me if I'm wrong with the pronunciation, a palladium of liberties. Mm-hmm. In other words, what he's saying here is this is the ultimate liberty. If this goes, you have no liberties, is what he's saying. And I was raised with the belief that, well, our founding fathers were just into hunting. They wanted to protect hunting. That's not at all what our founding fathers meant by the Second Amendment. They weren't giving us hunting rights. They weren't against that either. But they gave us a Second Amendment. It's right here in his writings. It offers a strong moral check against the usurpation and arbitrary power of rulers. So it protects us against government, is what it protects us against. It protects us against tyranny. And he goes on and he says, if this one goes, it will gradually undermine all the protection intended by this clause of our National Bill of Rights. So in other words, if you don't have a Second Amendment, you don't have the physical means necessary to protect all the other amendments.
Right. Rights, yeah.
So Second Amendment is gone. Rights, excuse me. Second Amendment is gone. Well, so is the First Amendment. So is the Fourth Amendment. So is the Fifth Amendment. So is the Eighth Amendment. And so this issue of guns, now that the liberals control all the branches of government, this is something you have to keep your eye on. So as this fake impeachment is happening, the magician is working with one hand. Here's what's happening behind the scenes, is they're now introducing all of this anti-gun legislation. And there's a pattern in history, and folks, don't get mad at me for pointing out the pattern. Just prove me wrong if I'm wrong. We have this meme that says the experts agree gun control works. And the experts are who? Hitler, Castro, Gaddafi, Stalin, Idi Amin, Pol Pot, etc. Every tin pot dictator that's ever emerged in human history has a pattern. First, they register the weapons of the citizenry. That allows them to determine where the weapons are. And then the next step is confiscation. I mean, you think Fidel Castro would allow his people to be armed? No, he's a dictator, and so his goal right out of the bat was to disarm them. We have this one here, the Gun Control Hall of Fame. Stalin took guns away from his citizens in 1929. Then he murdered 20 million of them once they were defenseless.
Right.
Same pattern with Pol Pot, Hitler, Mao. And you brought in some outside reading, updating these statistics a little bit. And this is an important book. Why don't you hold that up? It's called the
Black
Book of Communism.
And it's got a handful of authors.
Yes, and if you want a expose on the damage that communism did just in one century, the 20th century, and the countless deaths that it caused and misery and suffering all over the world, things they're not talking to your kids about in the school system, by the way. You need to get this book, the Black Book of Communism, because they play this game of, well, it's Christians that have caused all the problems in the world. It's the Christians that caused the Inquisition and the Salem witch trials, and do the math on it, folks. Get D. James Kennedy's book, What If Jesus Had Never Been Born? He refutes that 10 Ways to Sunday, and he shows that the atheists have killed several times, many more people. I can't remember what the number is. It's astronomically huge. The atheists have killed many, many more times in one century what Christians allegedly acting in the name of Christ did in 2,000 years. And this book, the Black Book of Communism, documents it. But what were you going to add there to it?
Well, I was going to add on Mao Zedong. So in chapter 21 on China, then it's saying, it's clear that there were between 6 and 10 million deaths as a direct result of communist actions, including hundreds of thousands of Tibetans. In addition, tens of millions of counter-revolutionaries, I forgot that number, passed long periods of their lives inside the prison system, with perhaps 20 million dying there. To that total should be added the staggering number of deaths during the ill-named Great Leap Forward. Estimates range from 20 million to 43 million dead for the years 1959 to 1961, all victims of a famine caused by the misguided projects of a single man, Mao Zedong. So adding those up alone, that's 73 million.
Mm-hmm. And this meme, what did our meme say here?
It said 20.
20 million.
So triple in the sum.
The meme, here we have on the meme, Mao Zedong, took guns away from his citizens in 1935 and then murdered 20 million of his people once defenseless. And you say that number should be up to
73 million.
73 million. And that's communism. And anybody that is intellectually honest and wants to research this will see this for what it is. Just because this part of history has been blacked out doesn't mean it didn't happen. And what is happening in the midst of this fake impeachment is now they're rushing through all of this gun control legislation. And one of the things I want people to be aware of is H.R. 127. And here I have an article from Tyler Durden, February the 3rd, 2021. The title of it is H.R. 127, a new bill in Congress would literally end your Second Amendment rights permanently. So can you read there what he says?
If a new bill that has been introduced in Congress eventually becomes law, the Second Amendment will still be in the U.S. Constitution, but for all practical purposes, the rights that it is supposed to guarantee will be dead and gone. H.R. 127 was submitted on January 4th. It contains a lot of technical language, and so in this article I'm going to try to break down what it means very simply. Now that the Democrats control the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, there's going to be a major push to ram through some form of gun control legislation. If it is not this bill, it will be another one, so we need to be diligent. One of the biggest things that H.R. 127 would do is that it would create a national firearms registration system that would literally be accessible by anyone. H.R. 127 establishes a federal firearms registration system that will be accessible by federal, state, and local governments, including the military, even the general public.
Wow.
The system will track the make, model, and serial number of all firearms, their owners, the dates they were acquired, and where they are being stored. So if your neighbor, a coworker, or someone that just wanted to rob your house wanted to know how you were armed, all they would have to do would be to look it up in the firearms registration system.
Wow.
This bill would also apply retroactively.
Mm.
Within 3 months, you would have to report to the government where you bought all of your guns, when they were purchased, and where they are currently being stored. Needless to say, if the government knows where all of your guns are being stored, it would make it that much easier to grab them from you at some future date.
All right, let's stop there just for a second. Remember the pattern in history?
Mm-hmm.
Registration ultimately leads to confiscation everywhere, historically. So this is what we have. H.R. 127 is calling for a registration of all guns. It's retroactive, where it goes back to what you purchased 3 months ago. And it tells everybody if you have guns in your house and where they're located. It gives that information to the government. It gives that information to private citizens that maybe want to do you harm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so-and-so's not armed. Maybe I could go into their house and have my way with them. This is the insanity that we're descending into. And could you pick it up there with that paragraph, H.R. 127?
H.R. 127 would also require all gun owners to be federally licensed. That would mean that owning a gun would no longer be a right. Instead, it would be reduced to a privilege that the government could take away at any time.
Like a driver's license.
Uh-huh.
It's a privilege. The problem is, it's not a privilege. It's an inalienable right. I showed you earlier the writings of Justice Story that comes from God. And the government has no right to take a right and turn it into a privilege for some, just like a driver's license. If you can continue there.
According to the bill, the licensing procedure would include a psychological evaluation. The licensing requirement mandates that the license applicant undergoes a criminal background check and then submits to a psychological evaluation to determine whether the person is psychologically unsuited to possess a firearm. Successful licensees must show they have an insurance policy which will cost $800, and it wouldn't just be you that would get interviewed. According to the bill, spouses and other family members would be interviewed as well. For the psychological evaluation, a licensed psychologist will interview individual spouses and at least 2 other family members or associates to, quote, further determine the state of the mental, emotional, and relational stability of the individual in relation to firearms, end quote. Licenses will be denied to individuals hospitalized for issues such as depressive episodes. No duration for license disability is specified, and it does not matter whether the individual sought help voluntarily.
Okay, let's stop there just for a second. In other words, you go through a psychological profile to determine if you're fit to keep and bear arms. And the psychological categories are so broad, you can basically deny it to anybody. Oh, you showed up at a Trump rally. You must be a Trump worshiper. You must be a Trump sycophant. No private firearms for you. And it goes on here and it talks about how they're even going to regulate or restrict the type of ammunition that you could own. It criminalizes the possession of large capacity magazines. Well, you don't need those for hunting. Well, guess what, folks?
You do.
Maybe you do. You probably know hunting a lot better than I do. But my point is the Second Amendment is not there for hunting. It's there to stop tyrannical abuses from your own government. And it goes on. I wish we had time to read the whole article. I would encourage people to read it. But it goes on and it says they're doing this at a time when everybody's saying defund the police and crime rates are going up. So it's, just as you need a firearm for protection most of all, this is the time in history that they're trying to take it away. I like to call it a Barney Fife type of gun that they want to let you have, where there's so many, remember it only fired a bullet or two?
Yeah.
There's so many regulations or restrictions on it, like getting this, what is it, $800 license or insurance. Well, not everybody can afford that. So we're going to put so many restrictions on it that the right, if it still exists, will be so micromanaged and regulated. And this is what's really happening as people are watching the magician with one hand and they're watching this fake impeachment, this H.R. 127, and now they have the votes to do this because they control the Senate and the House and the presidency. Now they have the votes to do this, to push this through. And I like what the author says. If they don't do it with this particular piece of legislation, maybe it's not H.R. 127, but maybe it'll have a different number on it at the end of the day, but it'll sound an awful lot like it. So this is a blueprint of what the other side wants to do. You have any thoughts, comments on that?
I think it's a hard time to be a woman in America. You can't compete in sports because they allow men to wear lipstick and run against you and defeat you. And now they're taking away from a woman the right to buy a gun at a fairly inexpensive $800. You can get a really good pistol for $800. And this is an insurance policy, which I don't know any insurance policy that lasts more than 1 year. So a woman, to protect herself, would have to buy the gun every year to pay the insurance policy. And so I kind of wonder if Democrats have something against women.
Well, I think that's a great point because they pride themselves on being pro-woman. But I think it was Curtis Bowers that put it this way: the issue is never the issue. The issue is the revolution. So in other words, they will use females as far as they can milk that issue.
Yep.
But once they're done with you, they discard you very quick and move to their ultimate agenda, which is basically disarming the population. A gun is the great equalizer. It's what gives you a chance at a guy like me who comes at you violently.
Yeah,
I mean, what hope do you have? Well, the gun is the great equalizer there. And so this disarming of the population is one of the most in addition to the transgender and sports issue that you brought up, it's anti-female.
Yeah.
And so this is an example of the issue is never the issue, but it's the revolution.
I used to have a T-shirt, but it's a little too cold to wear a T-shirt today. And this T-shirt says, the Second Amendment is the Equal Rights Amendment.
Amen. Yeah. So now, this is Sheila Jackson Lee pushing this, and no front page news there. She's a liberal. Well, it gets scary when it's the Republican side pushing the same issue. And here's an article from Aletho News, I think is how you pronounce that, by Eric Stryker, February 7th, 2021. Senator Marco Rubio, I thought he was a Tea Party guy. Senator Marco Rubio introduces a bill to suspend gun rights of anyone ever investigated for domestic terrorism. I know a very famous evangelist. I won't mention his name because a lot of the things he does I like, and I'm not trying to detract from his ministry, but he brought up Marco Rubio on the platform and basically promoted him, as a Christian in government, a constitutional conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And then you turn around and you read articles like this, and I'm wondering if this big shot evangelist is going to retract his statements. I have a tendency to think he won't. But what is Marco Rubio up to?
Republican lawmaker Marco Rubio has reintroduced legislation that seeks to suspend the Second Amendment rights of any person who has been investigated for terrorism-related offenses within 10 years of attempting a gun purchase. The Senate bill, named the Terror Intelligence Improvement Act, was re-entered last week in hopes of exploiting the hysteria surrounding the January 6th Capitol protests. The law intends to violate the civil liberties of American citizens who are not charged or convicted of a crime if somebody is deemed politically dangerous. If passed, the law will grant the FBI and DNI the authority to draw up lists of U.S. citizens arbitrarily labeled domestic terrorists and flag them during background checks. Those placed on the new watch list could be registered based solely on suspicion, even if an investigation fails to find evidence of criminal or terrorist wrongdoing. Federal courts that have examined the FBI's various terrorist watch lists uncovered that the Bureau regularly places law-abiding citizens on them because they don't like who they are or their political views.
Why don't you jump down and read the law's threshold,
Yes.
last paragraph.
The law's threshold for being put on the list is low. Under Rubio's legislation, being investigated for domestic terrorism, a vaguely interpreted offense mainly defined by partisan journalists and NGOs, that's non-government organizations, which potentially millions of non-leftist Americans could be subjected to today, would nullify your ability to purchase a firearm. Reporting done by Tucker Carlson tonight recently revealed that the FBI collected the bank records of hundreds of people who traveled or made purchases in Washington, D.C. on January 6 without a warrant. A hotel worker who had attended the Trump rally near the Capitol did not enter the building, was investigated by the FBI, even though they had no probable cause to do so. The FBI would have the authority to put the aforementioned on this new list without any meaningful checks and balances.
Okay, so I don't even know where to begin, but I guess I would begin this way. Rubio, supposedly a conservative, Christian, patriot, Tea Party, Republican. I don't know how these people get flipped, by the way, or who gets to them. But obviously this is not the same Rubio people elected. Or maybe it was all along and he never told them the truth about himself. What does the Bible call people like that? Wolves in sheep's clothing.
Mm-hmm.
He has in this particular bill these categories: investigated and domestic terrorist, that are so vague that anybody with the wrong political persuasion could be deemed as being unworthy of owning a firearm. And you'll notice the pretext, we covered this on our last show, Pastor's Point of View 153. You'll notice that the pretext for this is the mess at the Capitol on January 6th, which we don't even believe the Trump people caused to begin with. It was what we called then a false flag operation. And stunningly, Rubio is able to get away with this. At the end of the article, it talks about this and still maintain, and maybe you can explain this to me because I'm at a loss, an A+ rating from the NRA, the National Rifle Association. So my point is, it's not just the left pushing this stuff, it's the right pushing it as well. And what would you add to that?
Okay, so on that last point,
Yes.
Harry Reid the Democrat senator from Nevada
Mhm.
also had a really good rating from the NRA. So, the NRA, I think they don't really look into a person the way you and I would look into
I
them.
see.
But Marco Rubio, all I would say is Gang of Eight.
Yes. Well, remind us what that was about.
Gang of Eight was, I don't remember 6 of the others. But I remember John McCain.
Of course.
John McCain and Marco Rubio. And it was bipartisan, and we were going to basically grant amnesty. And so, from the get-go, he's someone that you've known had the capacity to betray the Republican ideals. But
And that was the issue then, was borders and amnesty, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So here he is, going in for taking away our guns, and this paragraph that I was reading, where the FBI collected the bank records without warrant, that's a Fourth Amendment violation here, and
so it kind of goes to show that all of these amendments go together, just like Justice Story said. If one goes, they all start to crumble. So this is a Second Amendment violation, it's a Fourth Amendment violation, et cetera, et cetera. Anything else?
Well, and what's really difficult is in the past, we've really been able to rely upon the NRA because that rating was very important. So when you had a Democrat like Harry Reid, I wanted to say Henry, that then he could get some support from some people, because they would say, well, I like to hunt, so I'll vote for him. I'll keep him in office because the NRA gave him an A rating. And so the NRA, unfortunately, has found itself in a lot of trouble, and it may not be around much longer.
So if the NRA is not reliable, who would conservatives align with?
There are some other groups out there. They don't have quite the visibility. The weight that the NRA has had.
Okay. So do your research, folks. Don't just believe someone because there's an R in front of the name, or it's been a conservative group that's been reliable in the past. But that's really what's happening in this country. It's the real issue, and this is what's going to happen, I think, over the next 2 years. They're going to make every possible attempt they can make, from the left and the right, to grab your gun or regulate your use of it so severely that the right is really not a right anymore. It's a privilege, or it's a Barney Fife type of gun. For the sake of time, let's move on here to number 3. As all of this is happening, I have here the American flag, but it's really the national anthem. The national anthem is under attack, and the reason that the national anthem is such a big deal is because of the doctrine of divine institutions that God has created. We have a chart here on the 5 or so divine institutions. These are all found in early Genesis. These are things that the Creator himself has built into the fabric of fallen humanity to preserve the human race in its fallenness. So there's conscience, marriage and family, labor, government, and then the 5th one is the doctrine of the nation state. God is in favor of the nation state. And the whole name of the game with the World Economic Forum is essentially to take the United States as a free and independent and prosperous nation and to subjugate it under the rubric or the umbrella of global government. And what do you need for a nation? Here we have the sine qua non of nationhood. Sine qua non is Latin. It means without which there's nothing. So if you take one of these things away, you don't have a nation anymore. So you've got to have a nation, which God is in favor of, common currency, common language, a common culture, and you have to have enforceable borders. Now, we've talked earlier how those are under assault, enforceable borders. But with the national anthem, the reason that's a big deal is that it's an assault, or it is an attack on the nationhood of the United States by denying our common culture. So wanting to have the national anthem played at football games, basketball games, wanting to have the flag salute in the schools would relate to a common culture. There has to be a common culture that the people within that culture identify with, a shared set of values, or you don't have a country. I mean, it's pretty much that simple. And that's why I always pay attention to attacks on the flag, not lack of patriotism, the evangelical deep state left saying that, oh, to have a national anthem is idolatry. No, it isn't idolatry. It's standing up for the doctrine of the nation state, which God himself created at the Tower of Babel. So, with all of that being said, we have this guy, and I'm laughing because all of the people that have benefited the most from America always seem to be the first to want to tear down America. We have Mark Cuban, the Dallas Mavericks owner of a NBA, National Basketball Association team, contending that we should stop, or that he will stop playing the national anthem before home games. And this is an article from Dylan Gwynn, February 9th, 2021, from Breitbart. And there's been some pushback against him, which I'm thankful for. But notice his mindset. Would you mind reading that to us?
Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban has confirmed to ESPN that he directed his team to stop playing the national anthem before home games. The move is not temporary, and the team has no anticipation of resuming the long-standing tradition. The Mavericks have now become the first major American sports team to officially end the playing of the national anthem. The Mavericks have not played the anthem before any of their 13 preseason and regular season games, though until now, Cuban had not publicly confirmed the policy change. Cuban has supported the desire of NBA players to kneel during the anthem as a form of protest. The anthem kneeling movement began in the summer of 2016 when then 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick sat and then knelt during the playing of the anthem. Kaepernick claimed his decision to kneel was a form of protest against racial injustice and police brutality. Since that time, the practice of kneeling during the anthem has been adopted by Major League Baseball players, NBA players, MLS and World Cup soccer players, and Olympic athletes.
All right, so let me stop you there. So this is Mark Cuban. We're not going to play the national anthem at home games, and we're going to follow the pattern of this Colin Kaepernick. And this is a mentality that is so far removed from my own. You know, I was raised in my father was in the Navy. I have uncles that graduated from the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy. We put our flag up at the 4th of July and other holidays. I was always told as a very young person to make sure the flag is down, prior to the sun going down. As you carry the flag, you don't drag it on the ground. These are all values that I was instilled with. And to see this multi-million-dollar second-string football player, Kaepernick, looking at the flag as a symbol of oppression, where he won't even pay proper respects to the country that's given him more money than most people in world history have ever seen. I mean, he has opportunities in this country the people around the world in world history have never had. To see him taking a knee and not paying proper respects because he thinks it's somehow a symbol of racism and oppression. I mean, I just have to tell you that that's a value system that's completely foreign to my own. It actually blows my mind to see that kind of thing happening. But this was a trend that he started, and now Mark Cuban wants to follow this trend by not having the national anthem sung at the Dallas Mavericks home games. What would you add to that?
Really, nothing in regards to the protest, but I like this next part.
Yeah, go for it.
Update. Despite an order from Mavs owner Mark Cuban to not play the anthem reportedly because, quote, many feel it does not represent them, end quote, the league has stepped in and mandated that all teams will play the anthem before games.
So the NBA stepped in and said, no, you're going to play the anthem. That gives me new hope for the NBA. I quit watching NBA games because of these kind of shenanigans. Now that gives me hope to maybe I'm going to start watching again. It's what someone wrote in their book concerning these actors and actresses. Shut up and sing. You know, we're not here to hear your political speeches. We're here for your talent as an actor and actress. And that's how I feel about these people in the NBA. And fortunately, our own, who is it, Lieutenant Governor, is his first name Dan?
Dan Patrick?
Yeah, Dan, second name Patrick. We have an article from the Epoch Times. It says Texas official announces legislation to protect the national anthem in the wake of an NBA controversy. You mind reading just that first paragraph?
A top Texas official on Wednesday said that he would said he would push for state legislators to pass a bill that would require events receiving public funding to play the national anthem. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, a Republican who also serves as president of the state Senate, announced the effort after one of the state's professional basketball teams revealed it stopped playing the anthem before games, breaking with an American tradition. The act is known as the Star-Spangled Protection Act, or Senate Bill 4.
So Dan Patrick wants to correct this legislatively. He's pushed back. The NBA is pushed back, which I'm very happy for. But I want people to understand why this issue is significant. It's the denial of the sine qua non of nationhood, and one of which is a common culture. All of these are attacks on the idea that we have a common set of values. You know, when I was growing up, this stuff was never controversial. Now all of a sudden it's controversial. And that shows you how close America is to the abyss, because our very essence as a nation is being denied when we don't push back against these kinds of incursions. What would you add to that?
Well, and I'm seeing this part about public funding because I'm wondering how many of these teams and organizations are using facilities that a portion of the money came from public taxation.
Yeah, good point. So these are all things, whether it's the flag or the national anthem or the attack on the Second Amendment or really the ignoring of the Constitution, you know, relative to impeachment. I mean, these are all things leading to the decline of the United States. And prophetically, what is arising in its place? I mean, what are you going to replace America with? You know, the progressives are always talking about progressing. And no one ever asks them, well, what are you progressing towards exactly? I mean, what do you want to replace it with? And what they want to replace it with is one world, Marxism, socialism, whatever you want to call it. And you don't have to look very far to see this coming, especially when you start analyzing number 4, our movement towards a credit score system. Now, we've talked about this in prior PPOVs. I think it was PPOV number 65. We went into depth on something that the global elites are pushing. It's actually being used as I speak in communist China, but it's what's called the credit score system. To understand it, you have to understand the nature of Satan. According to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 28, verse 13 and verse 15, which is a description of Satan's fall. Satan is a created being. I've got the word created underlined in both of those verses. So the moment you learn that Satan is created, he was initially a guardian cherub, we start to understand that Satan does not have the omnis, which are characteristics only God has. Omniscience, all-knowing. Omnipotence, everywhere at once.
Omnipresence.
Omnipotence, all-powerful, thank you. Omnipresence, everywhere at once.
Right.
So because Satan has always wanted to be like God, Isaiah 14, verse 14, he's always wanted these attributes. So since he can't be all-knowing and he can't be everywhere at once, he's always lusted after or desired to have some kind of system in place where he can monitor the activities of the entire human race. And how can he do that when he's not omnipresent? Well, he can do it once he brings in, and prophecy predicts, sadly, the day comes where he's able to bring this in for a season. He can't do this until he brings in his mark of the beast system. And the mark of the beast system is in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 18. It's a prophecy that people know very well. Even people that aren't believers know about this prophecy. And it's a prophecy that no one is going to be able to buy or sell. I would anchor this down in the second half of the tribulation period, unless they receive some kind of mark or insignia on their right hand or their forehead. If they don't have that, and by the way, when you take the mark, you're swearing allegiance to the beast or the Antichrist, Satan's man of the hour at that time in history. And if you won't do that, well, then they just cut off your valve in the sense that you can't, withdraw money from the bank. You can't get a loan. You can't put gas in your car. You can't feed your family. You can't hold down a job. You're just locked out of society. It's like you become, you're a citizen of the world, but you're no longer a citizen anymore. You're canceled. That's what they're doing, right? To conservatives, they're pushing a button, and they're canceling Mike Lindell, erasing him from the internet, erasing him from the computers, erasing him and acting like the man never existed. That is the pretext of the mark of the beast system. And the thing that is bringing us into the mark of the beast system faster than any other single thing I can think of is this credit score system. And essentially what it is, and they already have it at work in China, is they are able to track your behavior either through a camera or through your internet searches, or what kind of church you attend as you bring your cell phone with you to church, what kind of sermons does your pastor preach, what kind of websites do you visit, and from that data, they give you a ranking. And if you spend too much time at a church like Sugarland Bible Church, where the pastor teaches on the second coming of Christ and Jesus is the only way to heaven, then your ranking goes down. If you spend too much time on NRA improved type websites, researching political candidates, then your credit goes down even more. So every politically incorrect thing, if you don't recycle, your credit goes down even more. So once you get a low credit score, that means you can't put your kids into the best college. You can't get tuition loans, student loans. You can't get a loan for your business. You can't get a passport so you can travel internationally. You can't even travel. And so it's almost like, and you can go to this store here where the food is low quality, but not this store over here where the food is high quality. And it's like an electronic concentration camp in the sense that you get put in this electronic prison. And that essentially is what the credit score system is. And that is what is in full operation as I speak in China. And now with the influence of China in American politics, they want to bring this credit score system to the United States and the entire world. So that's how Satan's going to do it. As a being that lacks omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. That's how he's going to keep track of everything. And ultimately, this credit score system, or some version of it, is going to lead to this mark of the beast system, which will be in full operation in the second half of the tribulation period, subsequent to the rapture of the church. So that's what we mean by this credit score system. So we have this very recent article from Justin Fitzgerald December 23rd, 2020, very end of last year. And it's from a website called Reality Circuit, where it's talking about how the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is now arguing that people's internet searches should be tied to their finances as a basis for bringing in this credit score system. So what is happening in China should be exported globally, according to the IMF. Do you mind reading that?
In a blog post courtesy of the International Monetary Fund, IMF researchers called for internet search history to be tied to credit score. Presenting their findings from a paper they wrote, the researchers argued that by using non-financial data, specifically, quote, the history of online searches and purchases, end quote, we can solve the problem of, quote, certain kinds of people not having enough hard data, meaning income, employment time, assets, and debts, available, end quote. The authors of the piece claim that this move is a necessary innovation in order to compete with the rise of corporate cryptocurrencies such as the one in development by Facebook, who hope to launch next year. While Facebook is a monopoly that has engaged in political censorship, their power pales in comparison to that of the IMF. The International Monetary Fund is a veritable superpower with ties to the World Bank, and they oversee the entire global economy. It should go without saying that giving this organization the power to track everyone's search history can lead to some dark ramifications. With private banks, notably JP Morgan and Chase Bank, already kicking conservatives off of their services, one can only imagine how much this would escalate with the IMF tracking everyone's search history.
Now, your search history is your search history, and it's there as your electronic footprint, and there's nothing you can do to get rid of it. So you bought a book that's politically incorrect on Amazon. That's part of your search history.
You mean like the Black Book of Communism?
Exactly. That's part of your search history. And so this goes towards your credit score ranking. And everybody is upset about being kicked off Facebook and things like that. Folks, you ain't seen nothing yet. Facebook is just communication with other people. This is being tied, according to this article, to the International Monetary Fund, which controls everything related to finances. And so what is being argued here is that your search history should have some reflection on your credit score, and that determines whether you can participate in the international economic climate or environment. And if this is not exactly what John was warning about, I don't know what is. Now let me be clear. I don't think the mark of the beast system is here yet, because the beast isn't here. But if this is not some kind of precursor to it, I guess I'll be totally shocked, because I read stuff like this, and Revelation 13, 16 through 18 is jumping right off the page to me.
Well, I was just going to add, there are some jobs that they want to ensure for security purposes that you wouldn't be someone that could be subjected to blackmail,
Yes.
and having debt and having a poor credit score. Mm-hmm. So it's fairly routine when you're seeking employment to have a credit report run. Mm-hmm. So you were talking about being able to travel.
Well, see, this is a little different in the sense that it's not just about you're delinquent in the past with payments. I mean, I understand why someone that loans you money would want that information. This is called a social credit score system, meaning we're going to rank people based on ideology, religion, political beliefs, what kind of political figures they listen to, what kind of pastors they listen to, how frequently they read their online Bible. Mm-hmm. That's what scares me about this, but go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking there could be employers that if they see that score, they see that number, and if it's a low number, then
they assume you're a bad person.
Yeah, they assume you're a bad person. It's your security risk, and it's just the fact that you're a conservative.
Yeah. So as the gun grabbers and the national anthem are the national anthem is being suppressed and the gun grabbers are in full swing, in the midst of fake impeachment and America's in decline, this is the new system they want to replace everything with. What are we progressing towards? And let's move to our fifth category here, anti-Semitism, which we're always concerned about because God says in his word, Genesis 12, verse 3, concerning Israel, the one who curses you, I will curse. So if your country starts taking an anti-Israel direction, you want to pay attention to that. My understanding of Bible prophecy is anti-Semitism, which I would define as an irrational hatred for the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. My understanding of Bible prophecy is that will increase, and it will actually reach its zenith in the second half of the tribulation period after Satan loses permanent access to heaven. And you see that in Revelation chapter 12, verses 6 through 17. Now, we covered a little bit of this last time with Maher Bitter, and you corroborated the proper pronunciation of that. We talked last time, I think this was PPOV number 153, about United States President Biden's choice to name an anti-Israel political activist as senior director for intelligence at the National Security Council. And this guy was actually involved in chairing a panel at BDS. Now, BDS, for the uninitiated, is boycott, divestment, and sanctions against who? South Africa for apartheid? No, against Israel. Because Israel, we're told by these propagandists, is as much as a apartheid nation as was South Africa. That's why they've intentionally selected this expression, BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So Bitter chaired a panel at a BDS conference where participants discussed how to indoctrinate Christians to believe that Israel has no right to exist. Because the problem with us Christians is we keep looking at our Bible saying God has a future for Israel. Well, here's a whole conference this guy was involved with explaining how to deprogram such Christians like us through a manipulation of the scripture. We call this replacement theology. And this who is now elevated, this guy with this kind of background, to a position of prominence concerning the Middle East in the Biden administration. And cheer up, folks, it gets worse. We have this individual named, and you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation. How do you pronounce his last name?
Amr.
Amr. And the title of this article, February 3rd, 2021, from Daniel Greenfield from Front Page Mag, is Biden's new Assistant Secretary of State worked for Islamic terror state that funds Hamas. And this is a guy who said, I was inspired by the Palestinian Intifada. And this is who is now the Assistant Secretary of State in the Biden administration. Can you read that to us?
Starts out with a quote, I was inspired by the Palestinian Intifada, Hadi Amr wrote a year after September 11, discussing his work as the national coordinator of the Anti-Israel Middle East Justice Network. Biden has now chosen Amr as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israel-Palestine. Quote, I have news for every Israeli, end quote, Amr ranted in one column written after Sheikh Salah Shahada, the head of Hamas Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, was taken out by an Israeli airstrike. Amr warned that Arabs, quote, now have televisions and they will never forget what the Israeli people, the Israeli military, and Israeli democracy have done to Palestinian children. And there will be thousands who will seek to avenge these brutal murders of innocents, end quote. He also threatened Americans that, quote, we too shouldn't be shocked when our military assistance to Israel and our Security Council vetoes that keep on protecting Israel come back to haunt us, end quote. The future State Department official was making these threats less than a year after 9/11.
All right, now just for the sake of time, not only is this guy on record making these kind of statements against Israel, but he's also connected to the Qatar, if I'm pronouncing that right, Qatar government, which, if I read the article right, actually was involved with Iran in terms of weapons and anti-Semitism. And he's also connected to this project of Brookings and the Qatari government, all of which are deeply, deeply troubling connections because of their links to anti-Israelism.
Mm-hmm.
So is there, I don't know, you spent some time with this article, obviously, because your pronunciation of those names was so good, but could you summarize in a couple of sentences what this Qatar Brookings project, I mean, how they're all related?
Other than just that this is the place, then it's like the beachhead, where then they're going to launch out. And I'm trying to remember, because I was really focused on the just Brookings itself here in the United States, and that was kind of the extent of it.
Yeah.
Because Brookings is a think tank, and a lot of people think of it as a Democrat think tank, but it has an awful lot of foreign policy influence. And the things that I was reading up on it last night, I went to Discover the Networks, which is David Horowitz's website, and it said that it really gained visibility and influence in the 50s and the 60s after it received grants from the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation.
Well, there's a book out, and I should have brought it in. Maybe you know of it. I forgot the author's name, but it's called The Foundations. And it's a wonderful book. I'll bring it in next time. It's a wonderful book because when, people hear the Rockefeller Foundation, it doesn't really faze them. This book goes into the roots of the Rockefeller Foundation. So you're saying there's a similar pattern here with the Brookings Institute and the Qatar government and their connection to this guy, Ammer, who is now the Assistant Secretary of State under Biden. I did notice in this article that this guy got his political foray initially into working with Al Gore. So it shows you where his mind is at, where his head is at on the left. But when you actually read this article, and I wish we had time to go through the whole thing, the front page mag.com article by Daniel Greenfield, entitled, as I said before, Biden's new Assistant Secretary of State work for Islamic terror state that funds Hamas. It traces this man's connection to Qatar and to this Brookings group, and it shows the anti-Israel thread, that moves through all of it. Would you say that's an accurate assessment?
Yeah, and Qatar, they financially support Hamas.
Yeah, in fact, here I'm reading one of the paragraphs in the article. Qatar is a major state sponsor of Islamic terrorist group Hamas. It has been accused by the U.S. government officials of being utilized by al-Qaeda and the Taliban for fundraising purposes. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, operated out of Qatar. He fled after being warned by a member of the Qatar royal family that Americans were on to him. And so the article goes on, and it talks about Amir's backing for Islamists mirrored the support for Islamists by the Qatar regime. So keep your eyes on this guy. His last name is, how do you say it? Ammer.
Ammer.
How do you say his first name?
Hadi.
Hadi Ammer. And he is just like the guy that we talked about last time.
Bitter.
Named Maher Bitter. And these are the kind of people that are now being placed into the Biden administration with an ideology that is, I don't know what to call it other than anti-Israel, anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And if this is where our leaders, if this is what our leaders are going to be like, I don't know how this country escapes the judgment of God when Genesis 12, verse 3 I'll bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse, means what it says and says what it means. Any nation that comes against Israel is always on the ash heap of history biblically. This happened with Egypt, Assyria, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And study those out in the Bible, and you'll see that at one time they were one-time world powers until the day came where they came against Israel. And now they cease to exist. Take Rome, for example, once a worldwide power. And Latin was the language that it spread all over the world. They came against Israel in AD 70, and Rome as a world power doesn't exist anymore. Latin is a dead language. And fast forward to 2021, Hebrew is a live language, and Israel is back in her land. God always seems to get the last laugh, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Relative to this nation of Israel. Anytime a nation comes against Israel, not only do they lose, but Israel seems to get a holiday out of it, whether it's Purim or Hanukkah or something like that. So this is part of the beast system that's arising. And let's unless you want to add something there,
Nope.
and I have to rush over things, sadly, just for the sake of time. But our last category is the rise of the kings of the East, or another way of saying it is the rise of China. Now, in Pastor's Point of View, number 152, we did a mailbag segment. I think I was here by myself. And one of the questions we asked, and it was asked and answered there, was what role does China play in Bible prophecy? So if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to go back and review Pastor's Point of View number 152, because everybody's interested in China now.
Yeah.
Remember it was Al Gore that was caught in the Buddhist temple. Remember that? With campaign finance scandals. And it was Bill Clinton that was, selling American secrets to China. And China has continued ever since that point in time to get more and more aggressive into American politics, right down to the Wuhan virus that came to us through a high-level lab in China, right down to the doctoring of our own election. China was largely involved in that. And so with this going on, people want to know, well, what does the Bible say about China? And Revelation chapter 9, verses 13 through 19 talks about the kings of the East, an army of 200 million coming from the Far East into the Middle East and crossing the Euphrates River, which is the geographical marker distinguishing the Middle East from the Far East. And the Euphrates River is supernaturally dried up to expedite the path of this army. And as this army of 200 million from the east is moving into northern Israel for the final battle of Armageddon, they kill a third of the world's population along the way. And this is what is happening with when you take the sixth trumpet, Revelation chapter 9, verses 13 through 19, and the sixth bowl judgment, Revelation 16, verse 12, and you study them together. This is the picture that you get. And we are of the persuasion that this 200 million man army from the Far East is most likely China, at least China as one of the participants. And to receive documentation about this, you can consult the work of John F. Walvoord in his commentary on the Revelation, the book of Revelation. It's called The Revelation of Jesus Christ, written all the way back in 1966. Walvoord makes the following statement concerning the sixth bowl judgment and the sixth trumpet judgment. Do you mind reading what he says there?
If considered a literal enumeration of the army, it would represent the largest armed force ever known to man. Considering the millions of people in the Orient, the literal interpretation is not impossible, especially in view of the population explosion. The passage is best understood as referring to the kings of the East, literally of the sun rising, referring to Oriental rulers who will descend upon the Middle East in connection with the final world conflict described a few verses later. The reasons seem to be weak for taking this prediction in other than its literal meaning. The rising power of parts of the Orient in our day in countries such as Japan, China, India, as well as lesser nations, makes such an invasion a reasonable prediction.
Now think of John seeing this. An army of 200 million coming from the east. There weren't even 200 million people on the whole planet when John had this vision on the island of Patmos at the end of the first century. So Walvoord, like a good Bible student, starts with the Bible. What does the Bible say? And then he takes a look at current events and says, how could this potentially be fulfilled? And he says the rising power of parts of the Orient in our own day. In countries such as Japan, China, I mentioned China here, India, as well as lesser nations, makes such an invasion a reasonable prediction. And so if you're trying to locate where, you see all of this incursion by China into American political activities, you want to know how that fits in politically. I would say China's aggressive behavior today was actually predicted by John in what he calls the kings of the East in Revelation chapter 9 and Revelation chapter 16. And one of the things that's interesting is this article from the Gatestone Institute, February 10th, 2021. It says China is creating a new master race. And what does that article say? And with this, we'll close.
Starting with the quote, U.S. intelligence shows that China has conducted human testing on members of the People's Liberation Army in hopes of developing soldiers with biologically enhanced capabilities, end quote, wrote then Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe in a December 3 Wall Street Journal op titled, China is National Security Threat Number 1.
Wow.
All these Chinese moves are meant to obtain, quote, biological dominance, end quote. Radcliffe, continuing his quote, there are no ethical boundaries to Beijing's pursuit of power, end quote. The experiment evoked the eugenics program of the Third Reich to create a master race. Shenzhen's He, after an international uproar caused by news of his dangerous and unethical work, was fined and jailed for, quote, illegally carrying out human embryo gene editing,
Wow.
end quote. But in the Communist Party's near-total surveillance state, he obviously had state backing for his experiments. Beijing's prosecution of He, therefore, looks like an attempt to cool down the Führer and prevent the international scientific community from further inquiry into China's activities. Quoting, what is most disturbing about these endeavors is that China has gleaned access to CRISPR, that's CRISPR, and advanced genetic and biotech research thanks to their relationship with the United States and other advanced Western nations. American research labs, biotech investors, and scientists have all striven to do research and business in China's budding biotech arena because the ethical standards for research are so low, end quote. Brandon Weichert, author of The Weichert Report and Winning Space, interview with Gatestone Institute, February 2021.
See all this talk today about genetics and alteration of people's DNA, which we're all concerned about relative to this vaccine. You learn that China has been using all of this stuff all along to build a master race. Did you know that? This Gatestone Institute article was stunning to me. In fact, we probably had a picture up most of the time there of this giant army of men that are these genetic experiments of this master race. The article says on par with what Hitler tried to do with the Third Reich. And the reason all of that stuff is very interesting to me is because, according to John Walvoord, China fits in very well with this army of 200 million that's going to invade in the last days and slaughter 1/3 of the world's population. And so we're living in a time period where history has finally caught up with the predictions, that are anticipated in God's holy word. And so this is a good time to be a Christian, wouldn't you say? Because if
Yes.
you're not saved, you have no security for the future. You really have no hope. And you have no basis for understanding why all these things are happening. See, all of these news items that we've reported on today, they all seem at first glance sort of haphazard, non-connected. But what we've tried to show is that there's a common thread through all of them. It's all about the decline of the United States and the rise of the beast system. You can put fake impeachment, gun grabbing, desecration of the national anthem or rejection of it into that mix, and what's going to replace the United States? This anti-Semitic beast operation, largely involving China from the east, implementing this credit score system. So all of this, relates together. That's why we wanted to bring this to you as a prophecy update. But the nice thing about being a Christian is our hope for the future doesn't relate to the direction of this world. God gives us a hope beyond this world. And what does he say there in Titus 2 and verse 13?
Looking for the blessed hope and appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus.
Adrian Rogers said the world's growing gloriously dark. In other words, as humanity moves in the direction of the tribulation period, we have the brightness of his soon return for us in the rapture to rescue us from the world, which could happen at any moment. And so we always like to conclude our pastor's point of view shows by leaving people with a note of optimism and hope. Is there anything you would add to what we said? And we said a lot.
I know we did. I know we did.
And you probably didn't get to half the comments you wanted to get to.
No, actually, I didn't have a lot of comments. I had some, what's that called when the doctor hits you on the knee? You have like
reflex.
A knee. Yeah, I had some reflexive notes, but that was it, and we got them covered. I just want to, continue to encourage everyone, because I was going to try to find it, but I can't remember where it is, that we haven't been given a spirit of fear.
Yes.
We have not been given a spirit of fear. And that's what they're afraid of, is our fearlessness.
Well, if you want to know where to find that, that's in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7. And I'm supposed to know those things because I'm the pastor.
No, it's just this.
I would put it this way. I get paid to be good. Everyone else is good for nothing. Amen.
Yeah, this used to be one of the ones that I would teach my Sunday school class.
Read that.
For God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline.
Amen. And so that's what we need to keep in mind as we move into these end times. If folks agree with this message and you're watching us on Facebook, just hit share. That helps us a lot because you expand our reach into your friends list. Go to my YouTube channel, just type in Andy Woods into the YouTube search engine, and the more you hit like, the more it frustrates the tech giants because it damages their algorithm that wants to suppress us. And the more you share it and subscribe. So if you can do that, that helps us. We're also on MeWe and Telegraph. Just look for us on Andy Woods Ministries. I hope this doesn't happen, but the day could come where we, like Mike Lindell and everybody else, is kicked off YouTube, kicked off social media. So our pastor's points of view shows, we not only upload those immediately following onto YouTube, but we also upload those onto our Rumble account, which will give you access to the video regardless of what YouTube decides to do with us in the long run. So with that being said, we're going to sign off, and we'll have a great week in the Lord, and we'll see you next week. God bless you.